Okay, so the Odyssey, yes, by Homer. We're going to look at this first text on the course. I said to you last time that Homer was the author of two great works, two great epics, one called the Iliad and one called the Odyssey. The Iliad being the first epic and the second being Homer's Odyssey, which we're looking at. And together they recount the events surrounding the Battle of Troy, which is momentous in the history of Western civilization. Not the battle itself, but the stories that arise out of it become significant, largely, I would say, because of Homer. It's Homer's recounting of that battle that has made it the event that it is, and the significance attributed to it. Homer wrote more than this. He also wrote some hymns. And the Homer himself is a very much of a mysterious figure. And one of the things that was so mysterious about him, and the question was raised, actually, whether Homer even existed. Was there one Homer? Were there multiple Homers? Sort of like with the book of Isaiah. Was there one Isaiah? Was there two? Or was there even three Homers? Is there more than one author that we attribute to the name of Homer? Homer was reputed to be, furthermore, and this adds to his mystery, reputed to be blind. Blind Thymerus, Milton calls him, one of his other poetic names. But he is reputed to be the author of this story, and the account of the sack of Troy was disputed by many to be whether it actually recounted a history that actually occurred. I mean, did the Battle of Troy actually take place, or is it just a mythological tale of sorts in which we have gods and goddesses involved and all sorts of other mythological creatures? Or should we dismiss it as just a myth and a legend, and why would the myth and the legend be created? There was a time, a significant period of time, I have to go out there and tell them to be quiet in a second. There was a significant period of time when people questioned whether there was such a place as Troy and whether the battle actually took place, in large part because they could not find the city of Troy. There is no such place to be found. And I want to put this map of Homer. That's as good as anything. But you can't even see it. So this is going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. But it was disputed whether there was such a place, and archaeologists, the science of archaeology really beginning in the 19th century, excavating ancient cities, could find no such place because they were looking along the coast, along the coast of the Mediterranean, and there was no site that we could attribute to the city of Troy. And in the, so this will come on a second here, and maybe I need to push it around so that you can see the screen. Until an archaeologist by the name of Heinrich Schliemann, found Troy at some distance from the Mediterranean and further up ground. It suggests that the water had receded. If Troy was actually near the coast, then and we can trust that historical record, then the water must have receded in some way, because Troy, if I can get this, and I'm not sure I can. Does that work now? Still not. It's searching. It will find it. There you go. Homer's Troy, here put to be right on the coastline, is actually quite a significant distance upland away from the sea. Not just distance, but further up. And what they discovered when they excavated the city of Troy is that it was a city built on top of multiple cities. Very common in the ancient world. That cities became sites where they were situated, and because they were favorably situated, the conditions for the favorable situation were grasped by subsequent generations, and they would just build another city on top of it. But they found a city on top of a city, multiple cities, and you got down far enough, you discovered things that made clear that this was the city of Troy. Among other things, they found the army of Hector and so forth. So, or maybe the shield of Achilles. Oh, this is interpreted. Never mind. They don't have a picture anyway. But all sorts of armor and brass paraphernalia, which made it clear that this was, in fact, Homer's Troy. And this was in the 19th century. And at that point, it was established that the legend of Homer, which is more important than the historical fact, was based on a historical fact. There was a Battle of Troy. And the rendering of that, though, as I said to you, is far more important than the fact that it was just a historical event, because it grounded an epic. I want this gone. Why is this here? Here on the coast of this, the Bosporus here is pretty close to, so Greece is over here, modern day Turkey is there, Troy would be in that area which we now call Turkey, at one point would have called Asia Minor. And the heroes from Greece mentioned here come from various places around the Mediterranean. So Ithaca here is off the west coast of Greece, and it's just a little island where Odysseus is the prince. Another prince comes from Phthia, Achilles. Mycenae, Agamemnon, the king of the Greeks, comes from here, and so forth. Helen comes from Sparta. Diomedes comes from Argos. Nestor comes from a place called Pylos. Idomeneus from Crete, etc. So the Greek princes band together under the general command of Agamemnon, who's the leader of the pack. The event happens because Helen, where is she? Menelaus' wife is taken away by Paris and taken back to Troy. And that is the face that launches 1,000 ships. The Greek princes gather together under the aegis of Agamemnon and go to war on the walls of Troy. So the first 10 years of the epic, the Iliad, are the Battle of Troy. It takes 10 years for the fight to begin, for the fight to conclude, rather. So 10 years of war trying to overthrow this place called Troy. And then when it concludes, there's another 10 years, in which case all the heroes work their way home. Now, most of them work their way home pretty quickly, because it's not that far away. It's not going to take them that long. It'll take them weeks, maybe months, to come back home. But when we begin the Odyssey, we will find that it's been 10 years, and Odysseus is not back home. So when we begin the Odyssey, 20 years has passed, and the young boy, Telemachus, has grown up without a father. And I said I was going to put this up and down. I'm going to do that because I want to show you the structure of the work. Because initially it was thought, even in the, and this was part of the composition issue, people wondered whether it was Homer that wrote it, or a series of people, or maybe even a group wrote the epic, because they noticed that there were features of the epic here that we would attribute to oral poetry. So it has certain formulaic formulations that are in it, and it uses hexameter, and it lends itself, and people notice that in that area of the world, people to this day, it's not that common, but they recount by memory lengthy stories. And the idea was that in its earliest iterations, a community would sing the story of the heroes of Greece, so-called rhapsodes. They would play it in the midst of a community. They would sing the story, and they contributed to that story along the way. There was a little bit of a performance. And there is some evidence for this fact, because in the 6th century BC, one of the tyrants in Greece, his name is Pisistratus of Athens, decides that we want a standard Homeric text because there are other competing versions out there, so we want to standardize the text, and we have what we currently have today, which is the Odyssey so we don't have different textual variants. You hear about this in biblical studies, textual variants. Same here, and he lands on what we currently have. So then it begs the question, did one man write this epic, or these epics? And for my money, the answer is yes. It shows all of the signs, the hallmarks of having coherence, which would suggest a single authorship. It doesn't mean that it has to be, but there are significant features that would suggest that it has that sort of individual brilliance and coherence that would come from the pen of one man. Still have the problem then of it being a blind man, but he could just dictate it to a scribe. Possibly. At any rate, I don't think it's a question you can particularly clearly answer one way or the other, but it's certainly the case that traditionally it was attributed to Homer, and to this day everyone says it's Homer's Odyssey and Homer's Iliad, so we'll just stick with that. As far as the structure, which suggests a single author and not just an oral poem, the structure strongly suggests a very careful crafting, and a master craftsman at that. So you'll notice here on the whiteboard behind me that the story of the Odyssey begins in Ithaca, which is the place where Odysseus is from. It begins there. It begins there, books 1 to 4, in the section of the book I said was often by scholars called the Telemachy. Because it's about Telemachus, and there's no mention of Odysseus yet. Or I shouldn't say there's no mention. He is mentioned, but we don't see him as a character. He's off the stage, as it were. In chapter 5, we finally meet him, and chapter 5 doesn't fit in with the symmetry of the book, actually. It stands there rather uniquely. This is where we first meet Odysseus. And I'm going to say a little bit about... Oh, that's not a very good marker. That's going to have to go. The land where Calypso is. Calypso's a nymph, and nobody knows where Odysseus is. He's with the nymph Calypso, but the rest of the world, nobody has any idea where he is. Now, the word Calypso is a Greek, derived from a Greek verb to hide. An apocalypse is something that's been hidden, is now revealed. It's taken out from being hidden. It was hidden before, and now it's been revealed. A eucalyptus tree gives you good shade. So he's hidden. Odysseus is hidden under the protection or care of Calypso, and as a result, he is vanished from the world of men. So he is literally lost. Nobody knows whether he exists, let alone his son. His son believes he's dead. His wife believes he's dead. The suitors that will begin the Odyssey believe that he is dead. And in the interim, they're eating him out of house and home. They've decided to sit in his house, enjoy the hospitality of Penelope and Odysseus's palace, and they're gradually impoverishing him, which is dishonoring him in his house. And so the story begins in a state of total disorder. And this is part of the injustice. And that we're going to notice, and I will come to this in just a second, the story of the Odyssey is about a great man who loves honor and justice, and yet his own kingdom has been destroyed and reduced to the injustice of a bunch of armed men eating him out of house and home, treating his memory abominably, and nobody can do anything about it because he was the sheriff in town. He was the law and order. In his day, the prince is the Supreme Court justice. He's responsible for justice. He's responsible for the execution of justice. So if Odysseus is away, his own kingdom is in anarchy. So we begin the story of the Odyssey in a state of anarchy. And the reason we're in a state of anarchy is because Poseidon, the earth shaker, who creates anarchy by his very intervention, is angry at Odysseus. So there's a fundamental state of injustice in the Odyssey. That's how the story begins. The great man has not been treated justly, and hence the complaint arises that the gods don't care about justice. So you need to, it seems like a story, but it's a bigger story than it appears. It's about, is there justice? Do the gods care about justice? Does it matter to them? Because here we have a man reputed by the gods for being a just and a good man, and yet he is being dishonorably treated by his fellow men, and nothing is happening about it. So it's almost a biblical theme that the psalmists regularly repeat, that the unjust often seem to do well, and the just seem to suffer a great deal of harm and suffering. So that's part of what makes it a great. You had a comment or a question. I'm sorry, I ignored you.
What's the name of the guy they believe to be dead?
The guy?
Yeah.
Odysseus.
Odysseus?
Yeah. But it begins in a state of total injustice and anarchy. And it's because of the influence, as I say, of Poseidon the earth shaker. Poseidon the earth shaker is outraged at Odysseus. Why is he outraged at Odysseus? It's not abundantly clear at this point, because the story of how he gets outraged is not going to be told until we get into the middle of the book here in the Wanderings. So what I want to say here is there's a framing here. It begins in Ithaca, it ends in Ithaca. In between here, so here he's on a desert island, basically. He'll get off the desert island. When he gets off the desert island, he will land on the land of the Phaeacians, and he will stay there for a while, enjoy their hospitality, and then they ask him who he is, and he doesn't tell them, actually, initially. But eventually, they figure out that he is who he is, and then he tells the story of his wanderings in books 9 to 12. So right in the center of the book, so if you think about it in terms of inside and outside, in the center of the story of the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus's Odyssey. So there's a story that frames it. It's sort of a frame narrative within which he's in the land between his wanderings and his ultimate home. And then there's a story within the story within the story. So it's a very artful narrative. And it's called the Odyssey of Homer. It is about Odysseus, so you might think. But when we use the word Odyssey to this day in English, we think of an arduous, long voyage. Not an easy one. It's not just long. It's difficult. It's hard. We get that, all those connotations because of this work. And so we're going to associate with the figure of Odysseus as well something that comes with Odysseys, namely wisdom. Wisdom comes with suffering. Strongly associated in the ancient world, if you think about it. Paul speaks about it in his letters, the patience that comes with suffering. We see it in the Old Testament books in certain forms of wisdom literature, the chief of which is the book of Job, the trials of Job. And Job being a sort of wisdom literature, the trials of Job are his sufferings. And Odysseus, to some degree, represents a human form of wisdom and suffering in his person, and the goddess that most favors him is none other than Athena, the goddess of wisdom. So there's something in this text. It's not just a story. It's a story that speaks to the issue of the appearance of injustice, the appearance of the gods' lack of care for injustice, the wisdom of a man in enduring the injustice, and in the end triumphing over it, that allows it a universal validity that transcends the specific context of the Greco-Roman world, or even the Greek world here. It remains of permanence to us precisely because those themes are biblical themes. And the answers are often quite similar. They're not the same. I'll come to the points of difference as well. But in many ways, they're very, very similar. And Odysseus then becomes a role model for us. Now, I said to you last time that the epic was an encyclopedic literary form. It was used for educating. It was read or sung in the great halls by a singer and recounted, and the young learned from the song the stories of Odysseus and the stories of Achilles, how to live. It taught them how to live. And I said that the word for in Greek for this is paideia, the same word that's used in Ephesians 6 verse 4 for what fathers are supposed to do to their children. Educate them in the fear and admonition of the Lord is the usual translation. The word fear is actually paideia, which has nothing to do with fear. But the word is actually paideia there in Greek. So in other words, a holistic form of modeling in front of your sons, and it's your responsibility as a father to do this. Now the dilemma here, the injustice that has been done here is not only is Odysseus' kingdom reduced to anarchy, but his own son, his heir, has not had a father. And there's an injustice there. The man who lived to honor the gods, who the gods do honor and love, has had to raise a son, or his wife has had to raise a son in his absence, and that's not right. That's not just. And the gods recognize this. And so again, it picks up grand themes, which I think still resonate with people, because a lot of people are brought up without fathers. A lot of people endure great suffering, sometimes over great periods, and it is a trial. Like the book of Job, it's a trial by ordeal. The story of the Odyssey shows that the injustice is a temporary thing, that the gods do care, and in the end, the wise man who, keeps to his integrity triumphs over his rivals and his circumstances. Do you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it was just for the reasoning that Poseidon was so against. You said it was not until the later books that it says it.
Book 9, yeah.
But in
it's mentioned right at the beginning, right? Just a little bit.
Yeah, it just says that
it's cursory.
Cyclops there.
Right. And the story of the Cyclops has not yet been told.
Okay.
Right? And the story of the Cyclops is in book 9, and Cyclops is with a son of Poseidon. So he blinded Poseidon in book 9, and that's why he is where he is. So in terms of chronology, and this is an interesting thing, and I haven't mentioned this yet, and I'm glad that your question made the issue rise up. Time is not the factor that dictates chronology here, because the events told in books 9 to 12 are the beginning of the story, chronologically speaking. Not quite, but close enough. We meet Odysseus for the first time here on the island where Calypso reigns. Ogygia is that's where we first meet him. How did he end up shipwrecked there? Well, these things happened before it, and it left him there. And then he got off that island, lands in the land of the Phaeacians. He tells them his story, and then they say, oh, okay, we're going to send you back to Ithaca. And then after book 13, they do, and then he ends up back in Ithaca. And now he's going to rectify all the wrongs that have been done. But it begins not from the beginning, chronologically speaking. It begins with different scenes. The first scene is the devastation and the injustice that has happened to Odysseus and his house, his wife, his son, the suitors. It's a scene of injustice. It's a scene of anarchy. So it's a problem. And where is Odysseus? Nobody knows. Book 5 tells us where he is. He also has a problem. And the gods are going to rectify the problem and start the machinery to rectify the injustice being done there. But we won't get to the story of how this comes about until the very middle of the book. So the epic begins in the middle of things. It's used, the Roman poet Horace says that all epics begin in medias res, and the word res means things, in the middle of things. So it's not chronologically like this happens, then this, then this. It begins with the problem, the dilemma. Then it backtracks. You see this sometimes in murder mysteries as well. It begins with the murder happening in front of you. A typical TV type portrait of this. You begin with the murder scene. It catches your attention. It's horrific, and then they flash back. How did this event ever happen? And only then, when you've got the backtracking, which happens in the middle of the book, then the story jumps forward from that scene. Typical in a murder mystery. It's a revelation. So first they need to fill in the blanks. That's how epics also work in terms of that structuring. We'll find that that is true of Virgil in the Roman epic, that it's also true of Milton in Paradise Lost. He'll begin with Satan in the pit of fire. How did he get down there? Well, there was a war in heaven. Where's that going to take place? It'll right in the middle of the book. Books 5 and 6. There was a war in heaven that resulted in Satan falling down, and mankind has not yet even fallen. That's going to take place later in the book, and so forth. But the arrangement of and structuring is a part of the epic genre, and it's told partly to produce. It addresses certain philosophical problems, and chiefly the problem of suffering and injustice. Those are what are dealt with by the epic. And so you can see why it's necessary for human beings who live in this world of tears. Why is this something that you want to educate your children in? Because it speaks to our human condition perennially. Odysseus himself is a man, as I said, of cunning and resource, and he is a trickster besides. So he's renowned for his wisdom. I'm going to say more about this in a bit. But this is one of the more troubling things about Odysseus. He has features that we would not attribute to wisdom. We would attribute them to being a shyster. He's do you know that word? Shyster? Well, some do, some don't. He's a liar. He's a liar. He lies all the time. He deceives. Does that mean that he doesn't care about the truth? It does not. But he tactically lies in situations for strategic reasons. So he conceals, just like Calypso's concealing him, he conceals the truth until it's time. And now this will have many different problems that arise from it, but one of them, and the philosophers will say, why are we having modeled to children the importance of lying as a human conduct? And why do the gods lie to one another? That's going to be one of the regular criticisms of Homer's Odyssey, and it will come from the hands of the philosophers. The philosophers are going to say, this is the text with which we educate the young, yet you portray the gods as being adulterers and thieves and liars, and like they're like the worst people you can imagine. They just have the superpowers of eternal life and seem to be able to change shapes and fly around and like superpowers, but they're really, really, really bad people. They just don't die. And that's the portrait. And Plato and Socrates and many other philosophers later on will be critics of their own tradition. And I'll come to that later on. But that's going to lie there. And one of the things is the significance of lying in the characters that we're supposed to be role models for. This is going to be a critique that Christians will make of it, of course, as well. That wisdom is not at odds with truth. Not at odds with it. And certainly it's not wise to regularly lie, which it seems like it is here. So, and I'm not recommending that, by the way. So the reason we're doing this at a Christian university, I want to teach you how important it is to lie. Yeah, nobody was going to conclude that anyway, but you might wonder, like, how does that play? When I framed it in terms of the fundamental justice issues and the problem of suffering, then you can see, I can see why this would be an important text and would be seen to be so. Any comments or questions before I put this down? Don't bring it on. But that's the general structure. The sack of Troy took place around 1200 BC. And people think that Homer probably wrote around the 8th century BC. They're guessing. 200 years later, there are, as I say, the tyrant Pisistratus decides we need a standardized text, and then we have the text we have right now. So, but was there an original author named Homer? As I say, I don't know, but it makes sense to me at least. I don't think it particularly matters in that sense. But there we go, the Odyssey of Homer. And what does this do? It does nothing. How do I get rid of this scene? No, I don't even want to, do I? That'll work. And I will make this, yes, sir?
Around him, when was this book written?
Didn't I just answer that? I'm guessing. If Homer was the author, he's mentioned by other figures and believed to be an individual that wrote it, and that's why I think it was a man. Nobody speculates on the council of people that composed the Odyssey. They speak of the noble Homer, probably about the 8th century BC. But it's 400 years after the events took place. So if you think about our own history, this is a man recounting events that took 400 years before. Well, what took place 400 years before for us? The Reformation? A little bit more than that. But it's a long time in the past. So he's not an eyewitness. This is not like the gospel accounts where we have eyewitness accounts. And so he's not interested in the specific details. Or exactly, it's the poetic rendering of events and its involvement in themes of justice. So even though it's an ancient text, it's composed in a different way and with different criteria. As I say, the New Testament texts, we know they're dating and they're very close. In the case of several of them, it's clear that they're eyewitness accounts. We don't have that here. Nothing like it. But this is the beginning of Homer's Odyssey. Just let me read the beginning here, because the beginning here is again characteristic of the beginning of every epic, in the Greco-Roman tradition at any rate. So let me read. Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways, who was driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Many were those whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of. Many the pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. Even so, he could not save his companions, hard though he strove to. They were destroyed by their own wild recklessness, fools who devoured the oxen of Helios, the sun god, and he took away the day of their homecoming. From some point here, goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak and begin our story. So what we have here as a feature of the epic, and I will recount these when we come to the Aeneid as fixed features, but just for now, we have the invocation of the Muse. Tell me, Muse. The Muses are goddesses. There are 9 of them in total. There's an epic muse, there's a tragic muse, there's a muse for history, there's a muse for music, etc. There are 9 different muses, and their mother's name is Memory. Says something about the arts and memory. It needs to be committed to memory. To this day, or nowadays, we think of artistic endeavors and we think about it as creativity, as in my own thoughts, unprecedented, original, no pattern, no inheritance. Not so the Greeks. They assume that all the arts are learned and memorized and committed to memory. It's to be so important to you that you won't forget. Totally contrary to our age. If I ask people questions, now they usually pull up a phone, and I ask, I do it all the time. It happens all the time now. I ask a question and I see somebody, and they give me the answer that popped up from Wikipedia. And I say, yeah, That wasn't what I was asking. I was asking if you knew the answer, by which I meant, do you know that in your head? Not whether the knowledge is out there, but whether you possess the knowledge. And you don't possess the knowledge until you can call upon it without recourse to Wikipedia. That's not knowledge. That's typing skills. The result of people who don't have knowledge is that it doesn't make an impression on your soul sufficiently to create character. I'm not saying you don't have any character, but I'm saying that the mode of learning that's not committed to memory means that there's not a stamp of anything on you. The word character actually means a stamp. Like if you think about a wax mold and a stamp in it, it's a fixed trait. There's no solidity to it. There's information there, but it can be replaced by other information. It hasn't gone deep into you so that it forms you in some way. This story, committed to memory, forms the people that have it in the same way that memorizing scripture will form your knowledge and character. It goes deep into you, and the word has that effect. There's a reason why Christians, I'll put it a different way, there's a reason why God came in human history at a time when the knowledge of the Mediterranean was Greek and the imperial conduits were Roman. The Roman roads were there. Knowledge could go all over the place. The gospel could go on flat, terrific roads here, where, and everywhere. And the knowledge was that of the Greeks. Precisely at that time, God enters human history and the gospel explodes. The people of the Greeks are the people of knowledge, and they believe in the importance of words. They commit it to memory. Most of us have got away from memory and memorization. And technology is part of the reason for that. Technology can know far more than I can in terms of information. The technology can in no way have the character that comes from committing things to memory and memorizing certain things and forgetting other things. Because that's part of sifting and discernment, is saying this is important, and I'm going to make sure that I show that I think it's important by memorizing it. And the stuff that I memorize stays with me wherever I go. I don't need my book. I don't need a cell phone connection. I have it in my own head, and in my own head it starts to work on me over the course of time. So the goddesses of memory, in this case the epic muse, is going to tell Homer the story which he already knows, but he's going to call upon divine help to tell this story, because the story is bigger than Homer. He needs divine assistance to tell this story, because the significance of the story is greater than any man. It's almost like eternal wisdom. And it's called the goddess because it's given that sort of status in the Greco-Roman tradition, and the arts are, for that matter. These are things to be rendered sacred. Hold on to these things. Now, as I say, Pisistratus, the tyrant, thought it was so important that the city had a fixed text that he said, I want an authorized version of this that all the Greeks will use here on after. So it begins with the invocation of the muse, and then the muse responds, daughter of Zeus, mother is Mnemosyne, Zeus, father, mother, memory, to begin our story, and then all the others. Guess who's speaking here? Who's the authorial voice? When then all the others, as many as, who's speaking? Doesn't say it in the text. Who's the speaker? Be wrong. Guess.
Homer.
Could be Homer.
The muse?
Yes. Both are possible. Homer's obviously writing it. No, it's the muse through him. He invokes the muse, and now the muse tells the story. Takes over. Divine inspiration. Then all the others. So the scene is set by Homer, calls upon the muse to speak through him, and then the muse speaks through him. Then all the others, as many as fled destruction, were at home now, having escaped the sea and the fighting, This one alone, longing for his wife and his homecoming. By the way, the word homecoming in Greek is nostos. You may say, so what? From which we get, which is a homeward return, or let's say a homecoming, from which we get the word nostalgia in English. The pain of being away from home. We associate it with the past, interestingly. They associate it with home. Like the word nostalgia in English now. Algia is pain. If you have fibromyalgia, you have pain in the fibers. Neuralgia, that word algia is pain. It's nostalgia. He to some degree suffers from nostalgia. Is he suffering from a memory of something that wasn't really real? No, he's suffering from the place where justice existed and he presided over it. He aches for justice. He aches for home. He aches for his wife. He longs to be back with her. He longs to be in a place where he was the great Odysseus, and not the place where nobody remembers who he really was, what he even looked like. Yes, he's a legendary figure back home, pretty much. Yes?
When it says godlike Odysseus, what are they referring to? Are they referring to like his moral character, his deeds, like what?
Good. It's a great question. It's first of all, it's an epithet. It's used repeatedly, like as an adjective, and you'll notice that in the Odyssey, that happens over and over again. Like it's white-armed hair. She always got white arms. Like what's with the white arms? Why has she got white arms? Don't ask me. They value white arms, I guess. She's an aristocrat. She doesn't have to go out in the sun. So she's maybe that, I don't know. But it is used to maintain the meter. White-armed Hera retains a meter, and it's told in dactylic hexameter. So often, and if you're gonna memorize thousands and thousands of lines, it helps to have certain epithets that you repeat over and over again. It's the wine dark sea. It's always the wine dark sea. It's gray-eyed goddess Athena, and so forth. So there's certain fixed phrases that recur. But godlike Odysseus, it's because one of his parents is divine. As I say, this is the Bronze Age, the age when gods walk the earth alongside men, and he is mortal, but there's something about him that is greater than your normal man. Yes?
Could you repeat what the meter is?
Dactylic hexameter. Do you want me to write it? Write it anyway. Dactylic hexameter is not what Richmond Lattimore is writing here. Doesn't work very well in English. A dactyl is like a finger. It's got a long and it's got two short. Dactylus is a finger. And so it's a long beat and then two short ones, repeated 6 times. Very difficult to maintain in English. So he does write, Lattimore writes in meter, but he doesn't write in dactylic hexameter. But that is epic meter. So as soon as you heard the meter, if you were Greek, you would recognize that it was an epic poem just because dactylic hexameter is the meter that's used for epic poetry. So there's a certain style that comes with the epic as well that you can actually hear. And it's reserved for that. You better not use that dactylic hexameter for comedy. Anyway, so he's the homecoming. His wife in his homecoming was detained by the queenly nymph Calypso, bright among goddesses, in her hollowed caverns, desiring that he should be her husband. But when in the circling of the years, that very nearly came, in which the gods had spun for him his time of homecoming. Isn't this interesting? So the gods have already prearranged when he's going to come home, and it's not yet time for him. Homecoming to Ithaca, not even then was he free of his trials, nor among his own people. But all the gods pitied him, except Poseidon. He remained relentlessly angry with godlike Odysseus until his return to his own country. But Poseidon was gone now to visit the far Ethiopians. Ethiopians, most distant of men, who live divided. Now, Ethiopia, as we know, is south of Egypt. It's actually a longer space, but that's the limit of the Greek knowledge of Africa. It doesn't go further than southeast or northeast Africa. That's the limit. And Poseidon has gone down to Ethiopia, where he's worshipped, who live divided, some at the rising of Hyperion, some at his rising, to receive a hecatomb of bulls and rams. There he sat at the feast and took his pleasure. Meanwhile, the other Olympian gods were gathered together in the halls of Zeus. First among them to speak was the father of gods and mortals. That's Zeus. He's always called the father of gods and mortals. Just over and over and over. Becomes part of the, again, it's an epithet. For he was thinking in his heart of stately Aegisthus, whom Orestes, Agamemnon's far-famed son, had murdered. Remembering him, he spoke now before the immortals. Okay. Now, what on earth? So one of the things I mentioned to somebody after the class last time is at the end of this account, there is a glossary at the back of names of the characters in it. Have a look at that if you don't think, who on earth is that? And it will tell you. So right there in the back for your edification are the names of this. But this figure Aegisthus and Orestes are both mentioned, and Zeus is thinking about those characters. Why are they even mentioned? Because, well, the reason becomes pretty clear, because Agamemnon also returned home. Remember that the head of the Greek expedition returned home, but when he returned home, he was murdered. He was murdered by his wife and her lover. And he was avenged by his son, Orestes, who killed Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. He killed them both, for which he is going to suffer, by the way. In the tragedies, it talks about this. But the gods are going to praise this because he rectified the injustice. And he did it by committing another injustice. You can't kill your mom. That's an injustice. However, you did it to vindicate the murder of your father, which is a just thing. So now it gets very complicated. But that event becomes the story which governs the Odyssey in some ways, but also many of the tragedies. So you can read Orestes and you can read Clytemnestra, and there are all sorts of stories in the tragedies about this event, which here the gods praise. They praise Orestes for what he does here. And there are certain analogies that are going to be drawn here in the story between these two figures. And so let me put them up here. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to put this up and down. I apologize, but I want you to see the structure of it, and then I'll move quickly back. So there's a parallelism going on here. And what we get is an analogy that is being drawn. Sorry that's so far down there. But the story of one of the Greek heroes, the chief of the expedition returning home, Agamemnon, and the story of his wife Clytemnestra shacking up with her lover Aegisthus and together plotting the death of Agamemnon was avenged by Orestes. And this event, first of all, the atrocity of the murder of the man, and secondly, the vengeance taken by the son on the murderers is praised by the gods. And this frames the whole frame narrative. So it begins here in the state of anarchy where we find what? We find Penelope surrounded by suitors and Telemachus and Odysseus isn't there. It's a state of chaos and anarchy. And they will immediately invoke this story of Clytemnestra, Aegisthus, Orestes, and the vengeance taken. But by the time we come to book 14, way over here, we're going to find that we're actually expecting Telemachus to avenge what's happened in his household, the injustice. And we're wondering whether Odysseus is going to get murdered, because the analogy has been set there as a pattern to follow. But in this case, it's not going to be like what happened to Agamemnon. In this case, the gods are going to come and warn Odysseus about what might happen and prepare Telemachus to act as Orestes did. And so it's didactic in the sense it's teaching them how to avoid certain scenarios, etc. But that's there it's right there at the beginning of the story, and it's going to be framing and exemplary at the end of it as well. So back down again, up and down like the elevator. First among them to speak was the father of gods and mortals, for he was thinking in his heart of stately Aegisthus, whom Orestes of Agamemnon's far-famed son had murdered. Remembering him, he spoke now before the immortals. Oh, for shame! How the immortals put the blame upon us. Put the blame upon us, gods, for they say evils come from us, but it is they, rather, who by their own recklessness win sorrow beyond what is given. As now lately, the Aegisthus married the wife of Atreus' son and murdered him on his homecoming, though he knew it was sheer destruction. For we ourselves had told him, sending Hermes, the mighty watcher, Arge of Fontes, not to kill the man, nor court his lady for marriage. For vengeance would come on him from Orestes, son of Atrides, whenever he came of age and longed for his own country. So Hermes told him, but for all his kind intention, he could not persuade the mind of Aegisthus. And now he is paid for everything. So he immediately addresses whether the gods are responsible for all our ills. And the answer is no, they're not. Human beings contribute to it in some ways. The gods follow the fates. The fates mark the beginning and the end of their life. I said the fates are three goddesses that measure a man's life. They pull it out, they measure it, and then they cut it. One grabs it, other measures it, and the third cuts it. And that can't be changed. What is fated, it cannot be changed. But within that time period of what is fated, your life can be more miserable or less miserable. And here Aegisthus has made himself more miserable because he ignored the Olympian gods in warning him. So again, when we think about it as Christians, we have one God. He knows what's going to happen from the beginning to the end. He's all-knowing. Here the gods are not all-knowing. They are immortal. They're not eternal. They can't see all things. They can't change fate. They themselves are bound by fate. So they're not really gods in that sense. They're like immortal people, and morally bad ones at that. At any rate, and then in turn, back to the story, the goddess, grey-eyed Athena, answered him, son of Kronos, our father. O lordliest of the mighty, Aegisthus indeed has been struck down in a death well merited. Let any other man who does thus perish as he did. But the heart in me is torn for the sake of wise Odysseus, unhappy man who still, far from his friends, is suffering griefs on the sea-washed island, the navel of all the waters, a wooded island, and there a goddess has made her dwelling place. She is daughter of malignant Atlas, who has discovered all the depths of the sea, and himself sustains the towering columns which bracket earth and sky and hold them together. This is his daughter. She detains the grieving, unhappy man, and ever with soft and flattering words she works to charm him to forget Ithaca. And yet Odysseus, straining to get sight of the very smoke uprising from his own country, longs to die. But you, Olympian, the heart in you is heedless of him. Daughter telling her father off. You don't care, Dad. You are supposed to love justice, and yet you leave Odysseus to his fate. This is terrible. Yes?
I just have a quick question. In
Yes.
that version, instead of goddess, it says God, the God of nature. I'm just wondering, like, what the difference is, if there is anything between those two.
Well, I don't have the Greek text, so I can't even. I can talk to you about it after, if you want to get into that. But yeah. But then she says, this is unjust. But you, Olympian, the heart of you is heedless. Did not Odysseus do you grace by the ships of the Argives, making sacrifice in wide Troy? Why, Zeus, are you now so harsh with him? Then in turn Zeus, who gathers the clouds, made answer. My child, what sort of word escaped your teeth's barrier? How could I forget Odysseus the godlike, he who is beyond all other men in mind, and who beyond others has given sacrifice to the gods, who hold wide heaven? It is the earth encircler Poseidon, who, ever relentless, nurses a grudge because of the Cyclops, whose eye he blinded. For Polyphemus, like a god whose power is greatest over all the Cyclops, Theusa, a nymph, was his mother, and she was daughter of Phorcys, lord of the barren salt water. She, in the hollows of the caves, had lain with Poseidon, and for his sake Poseidon, shaker of the earth, although he does not kill Odysseus, yet drives him back from the land of his fathers. But come. So it's not my fault, it's Poseidon. So what we get here is that Zeus is the head of a rabble of gods, and they all seem to want to get their way. And Zeus is a politician, and he doesn't really want to upset the other gods, but he's going to find a way of doing it. But he's really presented like a politician. But now that he's not here, like he's gone away, he's in Ethiopia. Okay, now's the time, he's away, and we're going to do this, we'll bring him back home. So that's the decision. And so what we get here is first of all, we get the council of the gods. Again, a feature of an epic. We get immediate from the invocation of the muse to the statement of the problem to the gods addressing the problem and trying to orchestrate justice in it. And the justice in this case is returning Odysseus back home. But even amongst the gods, there's reproaches. Dad's wrong. Again, get used to it, Dad. Dad's always wrong. Except that I guess he isn't, because what are you saying? And of course, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, knows how to manipulate her father to get him to do what she wants. Which is also sort of funny, but in a way not particularly admirable. But again, the portrait of the gods is not particularly admirable, and the Greeks recognize this. But anyway, then in turn the goddess, grey-eyed Athena, answered him, Son of Cronos, our father, O lordliest of the mighty, if in truth this is pleasing to the blessed immortals, that Odysseus of the many designed shall return home, then let us dispatch Hermes. So just because Dad said it, I gotta capitalize on that right now. Okay, well then, if that's the case, then dispatch Hermes. Because if you don't, you'll find a way of delaying because I know you say things and you say it's going to happen, you didn't say when it was going to happen, so now is when it's going to happen, and I will know. So you take advantage of the situation. And so you get a personal interaction between the gods, which is like families with difficult children. and difficult parents. Everybody's complicated here. They don't do what they say exactly when they're going to say it, and they use words to deceive as well as to reveal things. They said, well, then dispatch Hermes, the guide, the slayer of Argos, to the island of Ogygia, so that with all speed he may announce to the lovely-haired nymph our absolute purpose, the homecoming of enduring Odysseus, that he shall come back. But I shall make my way to Ithaca, so that I may stir up his son a little, and put some confidence in him, to summon into assembly the flowing-haired Achaeans, and make a statement to all the suitors who now forever slaughter his crowding sheep and lumbering horn-curved cattle. And I will convey him into Sparta and to sandy Pylos. He's over in Ithaca, and he's going to go to Sparta here and to sandy Pylos here, so areas near to Ithaca, right? I will go to those places, and I will take him there so that he gets, well, what does he get? He gets away out from under his mother's skirts for the first time. He has to act on his own. He has to make decisions. He has to get moving. He doesn't know how to act. That's what we're going to find with this young man who looks a lot like his father. In fact, he so much looks like his father that people mistake him for his father because he's a grown man now. He's got muscles. He's tall. He's handsome. But he doesn't act like a man. He doesn't know how to act like a man. Wisdom personified, Athena is going to go and make sure that he becomes what he's supposed to be. And when she goes to him, she won't go to him as a goddess. She'll go to him as an old man. Mentor. And take him under her wing, put an arm around him and say, here's what I'd do if I were in your situation. And then he does it. So she's going to go there, and then she's going to send him on his way. Speaking so, she bound up her feet, the fair sandals, golden and immortal, that carried her over the water. Carried her over the water. And then she caught up a powerful spear. Oops. It's noise. Edged with sharp bronze. Heavy, huge, thick. Wherewith she beats down the battalions of fighting men, against whom she of the mighty father is angered, and descended in a flash of speed upon the peaks of Olympus, and lighted in the land of Ithaca at the doors of Odysseus, at the threshold of the court, and in her hand was the bronze spear. She was disguised as a friend, leader of the Taphians, Mentes. It's a derivation on mentor. There she found the haughty suitors. They're proud. They're full of themselves. They're unjust. They have bad character. They, at that moment, in front of the doors, were amusing their spirits with draughts games, sitting about on the skins of cattle whom they had slaughtered themselves. They're, as I say, they're eating him out of house and home. They're killing his cattle. They're thieves. And about them of the heralds and hard-working henchmen, some at the mixing bowls were combining wine and water, while others, again with porous sponges, were wiping the tables and setting them out, and others cutting meat in quantities. They're basically men giving themselves over to their lusts. They're eating, they're drinking, they're carousing, they're sleeping with Odysseus' staff. It's not a pretty scene. Now, first to see Athena was godlike Telemachus, so the sun. As he sat among the suitors, his heart deep grieving within him, imagining in his mind his great father, how he might come back and all throughout the house might cause the suitors to scatter. He wants these men gone. And he dreams that dad would come back and do it. He's humbled, or he's humiliated by the whole exercise. He wants a man to take care of the problem, not recognizing that he is a man and could take care of the problem. He just doesn't yet have it in him to do it. Cause him to start and hold his rightful place and be lord of his own possessions. With such thoughts, sitting among the suitors, he saw Athena and went straight to the forecourt, the heart within him scandalized that a guest should still be standing at the doors. So he's not a bad man because he knows courtesy. He knows hospitality. There's a guest right at the doors and nobody's showing him hospitality. He goes and shows that he has good character in that sense. So he goes up and stood beside her and took her by the right hand and relieved her of the bronze spear and spoke to her and addressed her in winged words. Welcome, stranger. Welcome, stranger. You shall be entertained as a guest among us. Afterwards, when you have tasted dinner, you shall tell us what your need is. And she follows him, and they talk and so forth. And then they're served, and he exercises something, gives something of hospitality here. And what Athena is going to do here is give him a reason why he should not be stuck in the circumstances he's in, because he feels trapped. I'm at home, my mother's here, there are suitors all around, I can't leave her. I can't leave my mom. And I've never been outside of the court anyway. What do I do? He sends him on a journey to learn something of the world. And it's not a particularly significant journey, but he sends him out to find information, and one of the bits of information is to go back to his old companions and to ask where his father is, if he heard anything. One of them is Menelaus of Sparta, whose wife Helen had been taken, that started the whole Trojan War to begin with. Go find him. He's got red hair, as it turns out. Sort of irrelevant, but he's a red-haired man. And he tells him the story of his father. And he will learn something of the greatness of his father from one of his war companions. And men in battle have a particular bond that endures their entire lives. So there's something of this which makes Odysseus very proud to be the son of Odysseus. It's not just his mother missing a husband. Here's a man of honor who values another man of honor. And that makes him a proud man. It's like, you know what? Before I resented my father, and now I'm sort of happy that I am associated with him, and I want to be a bit more like him. It's preparing him for what's going to come when he meets his father. Because as you know, often in the movies, when a father meets his son and they've had no relationship, the son is so angry he wants nothing to do with the father, right? For obvious reasons, in many ways, or at least it's an understandable response. So it's preparing the ground for him to come back, and but she sends him on his way as mentor, and she does it in order that he will gain wisdom and knowledge. She knows perfectly well he's not going to find Odysseus. She says, "I'm going to send you to see if you can find him." She knows where he is, and she knows he's not there. So that's not why she sends him. She goes for him to prepare to overcome the obstacles later in the story. So his path of education is just that. It's a path. He's not going to be the man who avenges himself against the injustice of the suitors right now, but he will be when he's been prepared for the journey and for that battle that is to come at the end of the story. And so that's part of the path of education. Again, this epic is there to tell a great story, but it's also to give you something of what education is about, which is preparing you to live your life well, to be a just man. I think I'm done for the day, because I think I've run out of time, but I didn't get very far. I'll get further and I'll catch up, don't worry, this always happens. But I'll see you next time, okay? Please read on.